one thing that struck me while I was doing research for the book was the fact that the North has a very complicated racial history that has been, in some places, almost completely buried. So there's little willingness to engage with the histories of slavery, for example. And one of the places I talk about is Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which actually had a slave burial site under the downtown. And that site was unknown to most of the people who lived there until there needed to be construction on one of the water mains, and so the backhoes went in and started digging, and they started finding people's remains. And that kind of horrifying discovery brought the town to a very critical discussion about how they had buried and in some ways neglected to deal with their own history. The history of the people who had built many of the colonial houses that were celebrated in the tourist walks through the city, the people who had basically brought much of the prosperity to the town, which continues through to this day.
And you talk about in the book how for a community history is important. You talk about the history that a community acknowledges and the history that a community neglects and wants to forget. Can you talk about that for a minute?
So there is a way that all towns have their history they want to remember. There's things they want to celebrate about their past and emphasize to people who are visiting or who are prospective residents to the area. But there's also a history that is less, sometimes more salacious or sometimes more violent. And that history also informs the area because the act of moving around that history or trying to build artifacts or cultural institutions without acknowledging that history results in a community that is really disconnected from its own past. So many of the issues of discord, many of the conflicts seem to reappear over and over again.
And it's funny you mention that. I remind my students that I think in America we may have between 12 to 15 Holocaust museums, and it didn't even happen in the U.S. So in many ways, it is always easier for us to tell bad stories as long as our hands don't have blood on it. And I talk about how we have one museum dealing with enslavement, but then so many others dealing with this tragic incident, the tragic Holocaust over in Europe. Let me switch gears and go to you, Jason. The subtitle of your book is called Race and Politics, From Boston to Brooklyn. I'm a black kid from Cleveland. I'm a kid of the 1970s. And every spring I look forward to the Lakers playing the Celtics in the NBA playoffs. I don't know any black people that cheered for the Boston Celtics.
Right. Well, I didn't cheer for the Celtics either, Leonard.
Okay. All right. So in writing this book about race and politics from Boston to Brooklyn, you make a point that this is a distinct region in the country. You talk about it represents the best of American democracy, but at the same time, it also represents a dark history in America's race relations. Can you speak on that?
Right. I mean, I wrote my first book on white Southerners and on race in the South, and in some respects, that history was a lot more straightforward because the side of racism and segregation had for so long won out. But I'm a Northerner, and I had always been attracted to studying this, what I saw as a conflict in sort of the northeastern region, northeastern soul. On the one hand, the cities of the Northeast, Boston, New York, and the states were often associated with progressivism, political progressivism, cultural enlightenment, liberalism. And on the other hand, if you look at those cities, the experience of African Americans on the ground, it's an experience of housing segregation, school segregation, unremitting police brutality. And so I wanted to tell a story that had both of those stories together. On the one hand, honoring this reputation for liberalism, trying to understand where it came from, what to make of it, and on the other hand, telling this story of this more bloody history of segregation, racism, and prejudice.
And when you talk about the North, I mean, we talk about North versus South.
Right.
What does the South mean? Malcolm X said anything below Canada was South.
He did.
All right? And in your book, you mentioned some other authors talk about the North is anything outside the South. So
Yep.
the North can be black folk going to Seattle during World War II to work for Boeing, going to Los Angeles, going to Oakland,
Right.
even going to Minneapolis. So can you just speak to that for a minute about when we talk about what's not the South?
I think there's a lack of precision that I think Wendy was speaking to, and I think we need precision when we're talking about race and place. I mean, in a lot of even histories of the United States, there's the South and there's everywhere else. And the North is whatever's sort of outside of the South. California's in there. Oregon's in there, along with Chicago and Boston. But as we know, these are all very different places with, importantly, different histories. And, so I wanted to sort of be true to that.